Noon. I'll call the Harris Ranch CID. Oh, give them a minute to start recording. Sorry. Call this meeting to order and roll call, please.
Clegg.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
All present.
Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from June 22nd and July 13th.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes of the regular meeting on June 22nd and the special meeting on July 13th. Second.
Roll call, please.
Clegg.
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, we'll move to agenda item number 3, item 1, which is the fiscal year 2022 operating budget public hearing. I believe I will pass it off to David Hasegawa, our deputy treasurer, to start this off. That works for you, David.
That does indeed. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Mr. Chair, members of the board, the purpose of today's meeting is twofold. First, the board will hear public testimony from the residents regarding the proposed budget. And then second, the board has in front of it a resolution to approve the proposed FY22 budget. The proposed budget is in the same form that was presented in the budget workshop on June 22nd. The purpose of the Harris Ranch Community Infrastructure District is to expedite the construction of community infrastructure within its bounds. And it does so through the issuance of bonds. I did want to note that the board has received more than 80 emails from residents expressing their concerns about taxes within the district and also specifically about one of the proposed reimbursements. For those who are listening online, the reimbursements are not in consideration for the board today. However, because the district only holds one public hearing, this is the chance for residents to comment on all matters regarding the district, including the matter of this particular reimbursement. Per Idaho State Code, this meeting has been noticed in both the Idaho Statesman as well as posted at the postal pavilions throughout the district. I also wanted to note that although the projects have been submitted for reimbursement, the developer has submitted projects, they must first pass through 2 levels of review. First, each reimbursement item is confirmed as eligible under Idaho state statute. And then second, the value of those reimbursements is then reviewed as well. And so in conducting the review for the southern half roadways, which is the item that was written about several times, the staff will give careful consideration to the appraisal objection that the residents have raised. So once that review is complete, and only after that review is complete, are the items then presented to the board for reimbursement. So moving on, let me pause there and see if there's any questions before I discuss the budget itself.
David, that's great timing. I was just going to ask you, what is the timing of those reviews and that coming to the board?
Yes, great question. Mr. Chair, Board Member Woodings, the plan is that we would the staff would present those to the board at the very end of the recess. So about the middle of August.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Thank you, David. My question is, I'm assuming that that review will be done by both legal staff and bond counsel. Is that correct?
Yes. So, Mr. Chair, Board Member Clegg, that is correct. The review will be conducted by internal counsel. It will be external counsel, bond counsel, staff for the finance component, as well as the district engineer, who's represented by the city engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And how will the report of that be made public?
Yes, absolutely. So we intend to submit a memo that would be included with the agenda packet.
And will that be included in time for people to provide comments before our meeting?
Yes, absolutely. We'd be happy to provide it. In fact, I think that's a great suggestion. We can make sure that that is published on the district's website even ahead of the meeting schedule.
Thank you.
No other questions?
All right. So with regards to the budget itself, the budget contains about 5.4 million in project, in bond issuance, and as well as the capacity to refinance the 2011 special assessment bond. So you will notice that the overall amount that is included in the budget is over 12 million, which is significantly higher than in previous years. And the reason for that, again, is primarily driven by the fact that we intend to refinance the special assessment bond. That bond currently has an interest rate of 9%, and our hope is that we can reduce that by half, the interest rate. There is also $1.6 million in contingency that is in place if a bank or an underwriter were to offer longer terms on the bonds themselves. That did not happen this year, and so we do not expect to use any of that 1.6 million. One quick aside, last year, one of the residents, Tom Payne, asked us to consider other potential lenders and invite them to bid. And so DA Davidson was one of the ones that he had asked us to consider. And so we did invite them to bid on the bonds. And then before we move to the public hearing or any questions, I did want to address one question that a resident, David Williams, had asked via email. And that was about how public infrastructure is typically built up and paid for in developments. And so typically the cost of infrastructure is included in the price of the houses themselves in cases where there is not a community infrastructure district. However, that component does not necessarily mean that the quality of the infrastructure, the timing of the infrastructure, or the amount of infrastructure is going to be the same in one of those in an area that does not have a community infrastructure district. So I did want to bring that up. Those are my prepared remarks. I'll stand for any questions before we move to the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you. David, one more question. If we were to receive a bond bid that included the contingent appropriation, the purpose of that would be to, I just want to be clear, I'm understanding this. As we stand, the developer has already paid for many of these items. They're incurring interest charges, and the more that we can bond early, the more we'll avoid paying higher interest charges or extended interest charges. Is that correct? And that would be the purpose of the contingency if we were to receive it.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, Board Member Clegg, that's correct. You can think about it in regards to the fact that there is a $50 million authorization. So the district is authorized to issue up to that amount. And so the doing issuances and refunding quickly means that more of that 50 million is used to pay for public infrastructure as opposed to paying for interest costs that the developer ends up accruing along the way. So yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, David. I think you did a great job of laying the groundwork here. So you all know how we'll do this. I'll open up the public hearing now and grant anyone that wants to speak up to 3 minutes. We've received, I think, hundreds of emails and we've read all of those. So I really appreciate the input from the public to this point. I think I'll start with the folks in the room first, and then we'll move to individuals that are online. This is the only public hearing that's scheduled regarding the budget. So while we are not voting on or speaking of specifically the reimbursable items that will be part of the bond meeting in mid-August, because this is the only public hearing, you're more than welcome to speak on those issues as well today. So I'll open up the public hearing, and I think I'll just start from right to left. If that works for you all. Would you like to go first? What's that? No, no sign-in sheet. No. Would you like to speak or? Nope, you don't either, Doug. Okay. Would you like to speak, sir? Okay, come on up. Yeah. Just your name and address and
Hello, thank you for your time.
thank you.
Although I am unprepared, I will speak briefly. My name is Darren Donathorn. Sometimes my last name is known by Nice Guy. And I live at 3833 South Eckert Road, part of the CID, which was unknown to me at the time of the purchase of the home. Although I do have a signature on file that apparently I did, it was known to me. So my simple comment in principle is principally based upon the price of homes that have obviously gone up in our area. I'm under the impression, which I could be wrong, that no one ever foresaw the price of a home back over a decade ago when this was put in place, is my understanding. And again, I could be wrong, that no one foresaw the price of homes being nearly what they are today. That's my first point. Therefore, I think it's at least at a minimum needs to be revisited. Number two, I think it's, and because of that, I, for one, may need to move out of my home, especially if the increases continue on. Number two, that I've done some real estate investing development before. First of all, it was new to me to learn of a CID and what they were. And I've never heard of the developer not incurring as a cost of business the cost of doing what we typically call entitlements, or roads, sewer, water, electricity, gas, in order for the vertical build to occur or the home on that lot. This is the first exposure that I've ever had to it. And principally, it seems to me, again, that that's wrong, that the builder should incur those costs. I will admit that this is new to me and I'm learning. I did not have any prepared comments, but I thought I would share those two principally based concerns that I and my wife have as part of those who are actually accountable to actually pay the money. So as one that doesn't have a day job anymore and lives primarily on a fixed income, this is particularly hard in that kind of situation. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Darren. Larry, would you like to?
Thank you. With your permission, I'd like Bill to speak first.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bill.
Sorry about that. My name is Bill Doyle. I live in the Harris Ranch development at 3026 South Brookridge Way in Boise. And I thank you and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I moved to Boise 3 years ago after my children, now grown, were all educated and even employed. I note that when I bought my home in Harris Ranch, I did not receive any notice of the existence or nature of the Harris Ranch CID, the improvements being constructed, the bonds being issued, or the many millions of dollars in special taxes and assessments being imposed. In terms of my background, I'm a retired lawyer. I worked for 35 years as a municipal finance lawyer, also referred to as a bond lawyer, initially in Seattle. For the last 30 years of my career, I worked at a large international law firm, which had the largest municipal bond practice in the country, and I believe still does. For 25 of those years, I was a partner and then senior counsel. I worked on many billions of dollars in municipal bond financings, perhaps 20 billion or more. I represented states and local governments, as well as investment banks, sometimes referred to as the dark side, and other parties on a wide variety of financings, mostly in the West for city halls, convention centers, stadiums, airports, ports, municipal water and sewer utilities, municipal electric utilities, including large hydroelectric, geothermal, and wind power projects, public transit, public parking, and many other projects. Early in my career, I served as outside counsel to the city of Moscow in connection with the Downtown Special Assessment District. That litigation eventually ended up before the Idaho Supreme Court, and they won. Please note that I am not an Idaho lawyer, am no longer practicing law, am not representing anyone, and appear only in my present capacity as a layperson. I'm a member of the executive committee of the Harris Ranch CID Taxpayers Association. I'm appearing today for two reasons. First, I note that in my view, there are serious and fundamental flaws in the Harris Ranch CID under the Idaho Constitution. I am hopeful that we will be able to discuss and address those issues with the city. I say the city, as it is my view that the city and the Harris Ranch CID are one and the same from a legal standpoint. Second, I want to voice my objection to the proposed budget. Many, if not most, of the proposed expenditures are, in my view, improper for a variety of legal reasons. Those include the fact that both proposed and past payments to the developer for land assume that the land on which local access streets and other improvements have been built and which are required to be dedicated to the public could instead have been developed with homes. That, of course, is contrary to the facts and contrary to reason. If I am required to deed land that I own to the city, its fair market value, measured by its value to a reasonable, independent, prospective purchaser, is zero. A reasonable person will not agree to pay me anything for property that they immediately must gift to you. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to respond to any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Bill, I do have one question because this has been coming up over the past year since folks have become a little bit more aware of the CID.
Right.
It's my understanding that upon sale of the homes in Harris Ranch, prospective homeowners are supposed to be given notification, kind of given the pamphlet on the
That's a
existence of the CID.
misunderstanding. So what the development agreement requires, in my understanding and reading of it, is only that the initial purchasers be provided a disclosure statement. And the content of that disclosure statement, as you may know, is an exhibit to the developer agreement. But any subsequent purchasers receive no notice whatsoever.
Mr. Chair, was it included in your title work?
It's a good question. I pulled it out and there is a reference in my preliminary title to a CID. The point I would like to make is that the broader point is that under the Idaho Constitution, in order for any taxing district to incur debt and therefore to impose taxes to pay that debt, there's got to be a 2/3 vote of the qualified electors, which is a legal provision. It's a defined term under the state's constitution. What CIDs do is they attempt to bypass that in a variety of ways, but one of the ways is providing what you're referring to by a notice in connection with a purchase of property. But if you think about it, a notice in a closing document signed probably after you've already committed to purchase the home and have kind of fell in love with the home and that this is a place for you and your family is nowhere near equivalent to a vote. With a closing document, you've probably already made the decision to purchase the property. You're sitting across the table from a real estate sales agent who has some influence over your decision to sign the little disclosure document. And that this is the reason that's not the impartial, dispassionate consideration that folks are able to give to a proposition put before them when they're about to vote.
Mr.
you.
Chairman, thank you, Bill.
Sure.
I did not want to get into the constitutionality of CIDs. This is an Idaho statute
Sorry. Yeah.
that we're complying with. But I do think it's important that home buyers are notified that they will be subject to this additional tax. And so that's something that I've been advocating for, I think, since I really came onto the CID and understood the implications of it. And I think that that's really important. So I'm not sure what the answer is. We've improved our website so that there's better transparency there on the city side. And I'm not sure of the answer, but I would like to work on a solution so that folks don't find themselves in that situation. I think people need to understand that they would pay for roads if they were in a neighborhood that didn't have a CID. They would just pay for it up front. They wouldn't pay for it over a series of years. They would probably have lesser infrastructure than what Harris Ranch has. Harris Ranch has beautiful infrastructure because of this CID structure that likely would not have been paid for in a traditional development scenario. So I think there's a lot of benefit to it, but I also want to see that transparency side so that folks know what they're getting into, because I think that that's only fair. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Bill. Larry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's always nice to see you. My name is Larry Crowley. I reside at 3738 South Harris Ranch Avenue in Boise, Idaho, 83716. My comments really are kind of a continuation of the comments that we had last year. Last year was the first year, as I understand, in the 11 or so years that this board's been meeting, that there was any public participation or discussion of issues that directly affected the homeowners and taxpayers that reside within the CID. Bill's pointed out a couple of issues I think I wanted to speak to as well after he brought them up. One is this disclosure requirement. We purchased our house about 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago. And at that time received no notification, no disclosure, or any idea of the impact that the CID would have on our property taxes. It wasn't until we received our first property tax bill in 2019 that we began looking into it and trying to figure out where all this money came from and where is it going and how does it get there. So the disclosure issue is a really important one. Bill points out when we went through closing, I went through all my closing documents. We've refinanced a couple of times, and there is no disclosure statement included in any of the closing documents from our transaction. And it's very similar response from, I'd say, more than 50% of the people that are now members of our association. So it's not just a matter of disclosure, it's a matter of how it all works and the impact that it's having on people's budgets and what we're getting for what we are paying. There may be some nice amenities within Harris Ranch, but one should have the opportunity to say, I agree that they're nice and I'm willing to pay for them. We don't get that chance. We don't have an opportunity to evaluate whether or not those amenities are worth spending thousands of dollars a year in additional property taxes for the next 25 years. And that is one of the core issues that we have. So it's not just a disclosure. The disclosure process is it's a lot of work if it's to be effective at all, but it's not the answer to the core issues. Since last year, I just wanted to bring the board up to date what we have been doing. And so you'll be aware of what we're doing. Since the last public hearing, we have put together an executive committee of 8 volunteers from different neighborhoods within Harris Ranch. And that may be expanded. We have a couple more people who have expressed interest. We have also incorporated an incorporated nonprofit association under the Idaho Code, allowing for such associations. And we'll be moving to formalize the structure of that board and its activities so that you'll have somebody that you'll be able to get in contact with on questions or issues as they arise.
Hey, Larry, could you wrap it up here just real quick?
Yeah, I'd
Thank
be
you.
glad to, sorry. One point I wanted to make is the question about the amenities and how much we're paying for them. What's not been noted is the amount of money over the lifetime of the CID that a homeowner will end up paying compared to those that live outside the CID. If a house today is assessed at the average value in our neighborhood of $829,000, and an assessed value increases by 7% per year through the end of the CID, which is anticipated for 2046, that homeowner will have paid $163,000 in additional property taxes over
Okay.
that term.
Thank you.
So
Cut you
thank
off
you
there.
very much.
Thank you very much, Larry. All right, let's move online. We'll just call out the name and we'll go with it. Thanks, Dream.
We have Brian Wilson.
You hear us, Brian?
Yes, can you hear me?
You're very faint, can barely hear you.
No, I will try to get closer to my microphone.
There you go. Okay.
Is that better? I just wanted to make the comment, and I think it has been referred to somewhat already by the other individuals that have spoken, that the operation and application of the CID here within the Harris Ranch Association is inappropriate and incorrect. And that is that we are paying for improvements that are open and available to the general public and used by the general public. They are not used exclusively by members of the CID, which I believe is the more appropriate use of a CID for those improvements that are used only by the members of the CID. And again, you've heard how expensive and how much the CID members are paying for this, and yet the improvements are used publicly by anyone. And it just doesn't, it appears that this is an inappropriate application of the law here to the members of the Harris Ranch community. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Up next, we have
Brent Jessel.
Thank you. Thank you for calling on me. I don't have any comments.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Up next, we have
Jim Riley.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Jim Riley, 2367 South Trapper Place, part of the Harris North Ranch development. I'm here to express my dissatisfaction and the serious concerns about the organization, management, and financial impacts of the Harris Ranch Community Infrastructure District Number 1. I am part of the HR Taxpayer Association membership, and I'm also speaking to express my support for the opposition to the proposed payments to the developer of Harris Ranch, as outlined in a letter of opposition that's been submitted to the City Council and the board dated July 14th, 2021. I urge the board to carefully consider the arguments made in opposition to the developer's request and the remedies proposed by the association. I would also request that for any new bonds are authorized or issued on behalf of the Harris Ranch developers, that the homeowners who are directly affected by the issuance of such bonds have the opportunity to review and vote on the issuance of any bond that will affect their property taxes. To deny the CID homeowners the basic right to vote on bonds that affect our property taxes is to deny us due process and equal protection under Idaho law. In addition, as Mr. Crowley mentioned earlier, in regards to the disclosure agreement, I think it's fair to say none of us who were purchasing property were aware of a $50 million price tag of what that tax burden would be to us, in addition to 25 years of taxes that only we would be paying as opposed to other residents within Harris Ranch. And I would additionally remind everyone that, nothing was disclosed about the fact that it would cost us $163,000 potentially on average to participate in the HRCID. And I think we all would potentially argue and question the amount of value we get based off of that price tag. So other than that, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Jim. Up next, we have
Brittany Todorov.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can. Thanks, Brittany.
Hi, this is Brittany Todoroff and Tom Lindley. We are homeowners for 3760 South Harris Ranch Avenue. And we did have two questions and they're related. The first question is it correct that the proportion of our total tax bill, property tax bill, related to the CID will vary from year to year? So for example, in 2020, our tax bill, 20% approximately related to the CID, but from year to year, that amount can fluctuate. Is that correct?
I'll let you do your whole presentation, and Brittany, and then we'll bring David in and see if he can answer those questions for you. So if you want to put them both out first,
Okay.
and then.
Right. So if that is correct, that the proportion is variable, my question would be, how is the board going to manage in the long term that proportion so that it doesn't get to be egregious? Because when we look at our property tax bill for 2020 as it compares to our home value, we're at roughly, say, 1.3% of the property value, which is high. And I mean, if it goes to, 2, 3, 4%, that's, I would echo the sentiment of, the gentleman who spoke, who said that they would move out of the area. So that would be our questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Brittany. Appreciate your questions and comments. I'm going to pass this ball to David and see if you could provide some context to those questions for you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and Brittany, that's a very good question. And so I'll try and keep it brief, but this goes into the dynamics of how the CID works compared to the other budgets. So you have your school district, you have the city itself, you have Ada County, and the way they work is that they have a budget that increases at a pretty slow rate. Their budget will increase a few percent each year. And so as per your property taxes, that's not going to change very much. The way the CID works is rather than a relatively set budget amount that's almost, you could almost say it's fixed by the dollar amount. The way the CID works is it's based on a percentage. And so the CID, the general obligation tax, or the tax for the bonds, that is set at 0.285%, or what's called 2.85 mils. And so that 2.85 mils is going to be the same every single year. And so the challenge that has happened all throughout the Treasure Valley is also true for the district itself, whereby as your property taxes increase, and especially if they increase rapidly, then that 2.85 mils actually becomes a larger and larger percentage of the property tax. And so that's what's the dynamic that you're seeing, is as property tax, or as home values have skyrocketed, that 2.85 mils becomes a larger percentage of your property tax. I hope that helps.
It does. And then the second part of the question was, for the long term, how to manage that so that it doesn't get to be egregious.
Yeah, absolutely. So and this is where I think the board gets to weigh in terms of the budget, and we also work with the developer to better understand. And one of the items I did not say is that I will be working with the developer to bring forth their plans on where the district is, and I hope to address that in the next meeting. For this meeting, I wanted to focus on resident input. But you're right, it is a challenging one. And from a staff level, we've looked at different alternatives in terms of how much to set the budget to. And this is where your input to the board is very helpful.
Right. And do I still have a couple seconds?
Yes, you have a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We did send in a letter as well, but I wanted to echo the sentiment that we weren't advised as part of the home purchase process about the CID. And so we purchased our home in November 2020, and we didn't find out about this until 2021. And then we felt like we didn't understand for a long time what was going on, and we educated ourselves. And so that's why we're here. And then I just wanted to voice the feeling that we generally just feel powerless. Like we were surprised that this wasn't handled as part of a homeowners association or something like that, that this was, a statute is something that we would have imagined to be private contract law as opposed to it being state law. And I feel at this point, like I don't understand the ways that I can affect a change in this important matter that, affects my bottom line and my cash flows. But anyways, that was all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Brittany. And I just want to emphasize as well for everyone that for you, Brittany, as well as everyone that's listening online, that while this is the only public hearing related to the CID in the coming months, we do encourage you to continue to send your input and feedback to us. And as we come up on that mid-August date, we could continue to consider all that information. So let's go to the next person.
Next up is Steve Carlson.
Hi, thank you for your time. My name is Steve Carlson. I live at 3782 South Singletree Avenue, Boise, 83716. I'll be brief. I wanted to re-echo what the other homeowners had said. The other part that I'm confused about or not in agreement with is that because we're part of the CID, the value of our home reflects that versus versus a value of a house that lives outside the CID. And doing a little bit of research, you can look at a house in the CID and then go across the street and look at a similar model, and they're very similar in value. So I think that's something that David had brought up. So I just wanted to add that. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
We have two additional, Tim Carlson.
All right, go ahead, Tim, what's your online?
And Tim, I think you just need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, yeah, I don't have any comments either. I think all of those have been covered well so far, so I won't add any.
Okay, thank you, Brett.
Next is Shaylee Healy.
I'm okay. Sorry, I accidentally pushed the raise hand button.
No worries, Shaylee.
Sorry.
You're good. Thank you. Is that everyone?
Mr. Chair, we have no one else signed up to speak.
Okay, well, there's no one else additional in the room. So unless there's follow-up questions, I'll close the public hearing. Go ahead, Elaine.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask one question of David before we close, if I could.
Please.
So David, especially the questions that Brittany asked, I think something we've talked about the last 2 years is that certainly the board could make a decision that would generate lower payments per year. But the outcome of that, if I understand it correctly, is that those lower payments would pay off the debt that's been incurred earlier or later and result in a higher overall debt service to principal than if the CID continues to pay off at the 0.285 mils, 0.285 mils. So the question is the district, is it true if that's the case, that the district would simply be able to build less of the expansive infrastructure that they've got planned?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, Board Member Clegg, that's a good question. Ultimately, if the budget, for example, were to be lowered so that smaller bond issuance would be made, then you are correct that less infrastructure could be reimbursed. And ultimately, there is an agreement between the developer and the district. And so I would say that it would be important to include the developer in that conversation to understand how that would change what would be built under SPO1, the master plan. But at the same time, the residents have raised an important point, which is that I believe the board also needs to consider, which is, has the level of that tax become so high that it makes what, even if there's great infrastructure, it makes it too difficult to be able to afford to live there. So there's not an immediate answer that we can provide today. However, if I hear you correctly, it sounds like working with a developer to understand how a hypothetical change, if we were to look at a different amount of bond issuance or a lower mill rate, what kind of effect that would have on the district, and be able to present that as a scenario for the board to consider might be something that would be helpful.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, David. I wasn't necessarily suggesting that we should. I was just trying to understand the impact if we did. I don't know at this point, haven't had the discussion with my fellow board members about what the what action we'll take, but I guess overall just want to make sure I understand that first of all, we're following state law as it was written. We're doing that. We've done that, as I understand, very carefully every year. And that is based on a vote that was taken certainly prior to these folks moving in, although I'd note that the school district here took a vote 10 years ago and has over time been issuing more and more bonds against the vote that the people who have moved in since weren't a part of. It is not an unusual way, frankly, for those kinds of things to work. But in fact, we've based our decisions on the state law as it's written. We've based our decisions on attempting to ensure that as much of this money that is collected gets spent on infrastructure and the least amount possible on the interest payments. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, with that, I will thank everybody that provided comments online and in the room. Thank you very much. And I'll close the public hearing and I'll open it up to either discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to put a motion on the table for discussion, if that's appropriate.
Please.
I would like to move that we approve HR CID 8-2021, a resolution approving the FY22 operating budget for the Harris Ranch Community Infrastructure District Number 1 and providing an effective date.
Second.
Discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate everyone showing up and sharing your concerns, and some of your concerns I share, and that's that it's really a pretty cool mechanism to get fantastic infrastructure. However, it needs to have certain market forces applied to it in order for it to work the way that it should. And that's transparency. When you're seeing properties that are across the street from a property that's in the CID and those have the same value, well, that shouldn't be, because people should be willing to pay a little bit less for that property that's in the CID, understanding that they're going to be paying for that infrastructure over a number of years. If that isn't provided up front, then people aren't able to make that decision for themselves on whether they want to pay upfront for that property, knowing that they'll have that additional tax burden. So I think that that's really important. And I'm not sure what the remedy is. I would love to work with the Taxpayers Association and the developer to make sure that we have that level of transparency for folks that are buying. And it may be that people don't care, that people are like, okay, I'll pay what I have to pay to live in this beautiful neighborhood. But that's a market force, and that's how assessments are produced by the county. They're based on what the market dictates. And so it's not like some made up number. It's based on sales and actual performance. We had a presentation from the assessor just a couple of months ago to that end. So yes, property values all over the Treasure Valley are going up exponentially. That is increasing taxes out here because we have the same mill rate that we've always had. And now we have this discussion that we should be having about, do we want the developer to be able to build out all of the infrastructure more quickly, or do we want to pay more in interest over time and get less infrastructure? So I think that that's kind of where we are. I moved that we approve this budget because I think it's really important that we get a lower interest rate on the bonds already outstanding. I think that's critical. There's no reason in this market to be paying 9% interest on anything unless you have a really bad credit card. So I think that we should get that done as quickly as possible. And I think this is an ongoing conversation about what that balance is between getting all of that incredible infrastructure that is included in the master plan that was worked on over decades, and then passed, adopted, and then this CID board is now tasked with ensuring compliance with state statute and the build out of that infrastructure, and making sure that the tax burden isn't so much that it's causing folks like Mr. Nice Guy here to be priced out of his home. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with us your experience. It makes a big difference. And this conversation's not over, but this budget, I think, is the right thing at the right time.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you. Well, I seconded the motion because I also believe that it's in everyone's best interest to refinance this special assessment bond and move into the lower interest rates that are now available. I also think it's important to be able to do the legal analysis on the request for reimbursement that will be done now in preparation for actually determining if we go to bond on those items. I'd also add that, I appreciate everyone who's come today, and I think Councilmember Woodings or Board Member Woodings in this case really hit the key point, and that's disclosure. I think if we can ensure somehow that the disclosure is robust and transparent, then market forces can come into play on the housing. And if it's not, the market forces may not. And you may be very right that regardless of that disclosure, the housing will continue to sell for just as high a price because people are willing to pay that. But it may also prove differently. But we won't know if that disclosure isn't achieved. And I think if the one thing that we've heard over and over in the last couple of years, it's that while people admit they have in fact signed a title document where they were told that this tax existed, because that is required as part of the sale, the disclosure about what that was, how it worked, was not very robust. So I look forward to working on that. I suspect, knowing this developer, they'd be more than happy to have that be made better. And, if we can figure out how to do that, I think that's the first step after we refinance this 9% bond. So I will be voting in favor of this.
Thank you. I'll just briefly have a few comments. I agree with everything that's been said, and I really appreciate the input that we've been receiving because this particular board hasn't always received that type of robust input, and it's very helpful to all of us to understand where your thought process is and how you feel about how it's all going. I'll again emphasize that in mid-August, that's when there'll be the actual bond resolution meeting. While it's not a public hearing, that's where you can continue to send that information our way because we're reading it. And I know many of the emails that we received were about a particular roadway in the project. And that's going to be highly scrutinized, as David noted, to ensure that a project like that or any of them are items that can actually be eligible for reimbursement. And if yes, then what the appropriate price is. So I'll be supporting this budget and look forward to having those discussions going forward.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make one further comment? One of our folks who testified today said that we had not had public input prior to this. And while it's true we didn't have a lot of participation, I'd just like to note for the record, we have always had a public hearing on the budget and we've always invited the public to participate.
Roll call.
Clegg,
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Well, with that, there's no other items on the agenda today, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Second.
All right, roll call.
Clegg,
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.